Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out. I truly appreciate it. So I usually just talk. My wife always says, you're just going to talk? Haven't you thought it through? And in a strange way, I do think it through, but this time I actually wrote it down because I'm writing a second book. And I find myself kind of stopping a lot because I end up ranting as I'm writing about climate, because I've spent the last 15 years working with environmental groups and political parties, the Green Party in Ontario specifically for that, and it doesn't seem to work. It just doesn't seem to work. So when I'm writing about it, I start getting frustrated, and then I read it and I think, ooh, I don't think I'd read that. That's just nasty. But we'll try to get through it tonight. I'm going to start with a little story. Mitch Albom wrote a book called Tuesdays with Maury. It's a good book. I really liked it. He wrote another book right after that. And in that book, he had two stories going at the same time. One was about him and this rabbi in New Jersey. He worked in Detroit for the Free Press, writing columns as well as writing books. So he would go home for the high holidays in September, or late September, early October, to be with his parents. And the iconic rabbi of the synagogue was there. And after the service and the sermon, he asked Mitch, could I speak to you for a minute? And he said, sure, Rabbi, whatever. And he said, when I die, I'd like you to do my eulogy. And he says, I got to tell you the truth. I never go to synagogue. I mean, I don't go. I'm here for my parents, and that's about it. He goes, I want you to write my eulogy. So he writes the eulogy after 8 years of spending time with the rabbi every year when he'd come home to see his parents. And when the rabbi dies, he does do the eulogy. It's quite beautiful. But he counterpoints this with another story of a black pastor in downtown Detroit in a church where there's holes in the roof and the congregants are itinerant at best. And he has had a checkered past. He's been imprisoned, he's drug charges, he shot at somebody once. But at one point or another, he saw the light and became a pastor. So Mitch would occasionally go and write columns about this pastor, try to help him raise money for the church and things like that. And I was sitting there at the back of one of these sermons that the pastor's giving, and the pastor says, everyone in this parish is going to die. We're all going to die. And we have to understand what that means to our lives, and we have to adjust accordingly. And he's going on and on like this. And there's one guy in the front who's smiling through the whole thing. So he can't resist. The pastor finally says, why are you smiling? And the man says, I'm not from this parish. So there's one. Here's another one. Rabbi, he's home. He has a little kid. I'll get that. Double cheese, veggie. If you have him, kill him. So he's there, and his Orthodox Jews pray 3 times a day. Morning, afternoon, and when the sun goes down, or is going down. So every day after school, the kid would run home, and they'd do it together, the afternoon prayer. He loved it. The dad loved it, And then after a while, the kid would come in and run right through the house, right past his father, and out into the woods. Okay, that's weird. And then the next day, he did the same thing. And the next day after that, and finally, the rabbi stops and goes, so wait a minute, where are you going? And he said, I'm going out there to pray in the woods. And he said, why? He said, well, the reception's better out there. So that's why I decided that spirituality and the environment matter. So I'm going to start with a quote from somebody named Garth Speth, who's a scientist and a writer. He said, I used to think the top global environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation, and we scientists don't know how to do that. In Buddhism, they say awe is not merely a reaction to grand achievements, it's a way of being in life that is available to us at all times. You know, when you ask people what awe is, they say, give me the moment of awe. It's always, oh, my child being born. Well, those are extraordinary moments. But if we're available, like today, Elizabeth was driving us around, and my wife and I were looking at things and just going, what's that? Oh, those are the coolies. Oh, that's cool. There's awe in everything. There's awe in, as they say, God is in the laundry. It's not in that very special aha moment on the beach. It's in your life. We'll talk more about it. Now, if you want a surefire buzzkill at any gathering, save that of your local faith group's social action committee, there's two topics that'll do it for you: God and climate change. Either one, just mention them at a dinner party. Let's talk Netflix. Both are impossible to wrap your arms around, and granted, one is more concrete, with thousands of peer-reviewed research articles to back it up, and the other requires a heaping teaspoon of faith. I'll leave it to you to decide which one is more existential. For years, I've cut through the underbrush of climate deniers, God is dead chattering classes, in the vain hope that we could agree that on the climate front at least, reason and empirical evidence would win out, that we could rally around the scientific maypole and save ourselves from ourselves. Along with others, I tried the sky is falling approach. Seemed to work when my conservative friends used it, when they spoke about money, jobs, and the dreaded others. You know the shtick, the immigrant, I'm one, who can come take your job, the tree hugger who wants you to have no job, and all the lifestyle commandos that just don't appreciate the good life fantasy that we've been suckled on. The whole thing makes every self-respecting freedom lover with flags on the side of the truck want to tear into a bacon double cheeseburger, fries, heavy on the salt, and 16-ounce colas, if for nothing else, for spite. Nonetheless, I soldiered on telling people that at 350 parts per million of what I'm never really quite sure, the planet would begin to cook, and the irreversible effects of climate collapse would be upon us. Mass extinction of species, the sixth to be exact, death of the life-giving coral reefs, tsunamis, droughts, flooding that would see 1/3 of Pakistan underwater, continental-sized forest fires sending lung-killing smoke across great swaths of people and places that we claim to love. Told you this was going to be fun, right? Truth is, that kind of message reaches almost no one. If it did, it would leave them feeling helpless. If things are really that bad, what on earth could I do about it? In the Western world, we've reduced ourselves to being well-meaning pawns in the carbon economy. We stand in the kitchen, sort our garbage, paper, plastic, wet waste, which 10% of gets recycled. So we suck up more energy resources, pumping more greenhouse and methane gases into the atmosphere than the entire southern hemisphere combined. It's futile to blame the player and ignore the playing field, but it works well for the heaviest polluters and the most profitable carbon profiteers in the world. A while back, British Petroleum, after that disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, how the hell we got here, I have no idea. Well, they poured $100 million into an ad campaign where they helped us create our very own carbon use dashboard. Yes, you can have a greener life. You can be super vigilant when it comes to how much you drive, fly, heat, cool. Genius, really. Instead of owning the devastating effects of oil and gas production, and the massive profits that come from having us sidle up to the gas trough every third or fourth day to fill her up, they could instead state in a friend-to-friend way that you are the problem. But fear not. If you just try a little harder, you can fix it. Or to be more precise, you can fix yourself. You can see that though we stand at a real crossroads, we keep marching lemming-like towards head-smashed buffalo jump. In many ways, we've made our scientists into kind of a postmodern clergy. In this case, they seek a verifiable, tested, and proven hypothesis. Their job is to turn mystery into fact, an attempt to put meat on the bones of the unknowable that we call God. Now, before I go on, I want to clarify this God thing, because there's a certain allergy to it at this point in our society. As a spiritual director, it's a horrible title, by the way, let's call it companion. Occasionally, people say to me when they come in for their first session, look, don't get me wrong, but I don't believe in God. So I ask them, well, tell me about the God you don't believe in. They tell me it's a man, white beard, throne, and naughty and nice list. And I go, oh, Santa God. And you know, it's not far off, because most of what we think about when we think about God, if we gave it up, is really a pediatric version of it. And by the time they hit adolescence, they're just thinking, what are you talking about? Miracle this and miracle that. Another little story, rabbi's in his office. Student comes running in from the sanctuary. Rabbi, there's mice in the synagogue. There's mice in the sanctuary. Rabbi says, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. No, what are you talking about? They'll eat the Torah. They'll eat the parchment paper on the Torah. No, we got to do, okay, take it easy. Here's what you do. Go back out there, give them little kippahs, put them on their heads, give them a bar mitzvah, you'll never see them again. Now, before I tell you what I've so far stumbled towards, I want to share a few pearls from American philosopher Sam Keen. This is from his book, Hymns to an Unknown God. There is no one right way. The dignity and meaning of my life involve the discovery and creation of my way, my truth, and my destiny. To have a spiritual vocation, to trust that my life is a gift to be unwrapped and enjoyed, I might adopt many stances towards my life. When times are bad, when illness condemns me to pain, when tragedy strikes, when I observe senseless cruelty, I'm tempted to conclude that life is an absurd joke. Sometimes it seems as if we are hired into existence without our consent, hungry for meaning that is hidden from us, and sentenced to die for an unnamed crime we did not commit. But in good times and bad, I'm pervaded by a sense that it's a privilege to exist. Between the void before and the void after, the few years of my life are an island in time that's been given to me. So what do I say when I say God? Well, let's look at that question through the lens of the James Webb Telescope. The pictures it sends back to Earth as it travels through our little corner of the galaxy, pictures of swirling nebulas, dying stars, and black holes. A Google search came up with this. The observable universe contains as many as an estimated 2 trillion galaxies. Not stars, galaxies. 2 trillion galaxies. I just, every time I think of it. And overall, an estimated 10 to the power of 24, whoever's good at math can do that, more stars than there are grains of beach sand on planet Earth. Try to get your head around that for a second. More stars than there are grains of sand on planet Earth. And yet we think we're the biggest thing in the movie. When I say God, I bend my knee to the unimaginable, constantly expanding universe. A star dies. The force of the explosion pushes nearby gases together. A new sun is born, birthing a new family of planets. And the cycle plays out over literally billions of years. My God is the creative, relentless urge to life. My God is a verb, not a noun, not a guy. It's a thing. It's happening right now. It never stops. We're born, we procreate, and the miracle is contained in the birth of our children. Trees die, and if left where they fall, they become the nursery for more life to arrive. Now, if you just cut them down, that's good for GDP. If you leave them up, So I have no idea why, but for me the universe is a pulsing force that must create, and we're microcells in the body of that creation. I think our task is to choose. Will we be a healthy cell or a cancerous one? That's my God. a placeholder for the profoundly miraculous and unknowable. Mystery is a good thing. Remember when we didn't have phones and somebody had an argument sitting at a dinner table with you and said, no, it's 52. And you're like, no, it's 40. No, it's now, as soon as somebody says that, you whip out a phone. You're wrong. So we don't even have the enjoyment of having the person doubt themselves anymore. A little more Sam Keen. Whenever you're confused, keep heading in that direction, and it leads towards your love and caring for all living things, including yourself, and you will never stray far from the path to fulfillment. So let's bring all this into where I believe spirit and climate change come together. To help us wrap our arms around the existential crisis of climate change, I want to focus on two things: awe and sacred relationship. Unlike most modern-day clergy, scientists have led the charge in the battle against climate change in a way that few in the world of organized religion have. Perhaps that's why I'm more a fan of disorganized religion. The IPCC reports that come out of the United Nations break my heart. They're filled with a chorus of desperate and futile cries for climate sanity, but fact cannot seem to win the day. Meanwhile, in so many temples, we speak of a God that's distant and judgmental, the stern 1950s dad, prone to statements like, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. God outside of us, a noun, a mannish figure, a gatekeeper to a better life to come. Our focus in Judeo-Christian Muslim life is not this life, but the reward in death of a better place. But what if heaven isn't a destination, but it's all around us and inside us in this life? What if we make ourselves available to the sacred in everything? As we sink further into climate denial, fact has been relegated to the realm of opinion. Think on that for a moment. Verifiable fact, things that universities spend a lot of their life force about, has been reduced in the hands of those that profit the most from the carbon call and downgraded to you being a crazy uncle at the dinner table spiting half-baked opinions. Why do we do this to ourselves? That's the question I keep asking myself. If I think about three devils that Speth singles out, the answers begin to come into focus: greed, apathy, and selfishness. I want to look at these regrettable traits not from a high personal rectitude perch. I suffer these ills like the rest of us. We're rewarded for our worship not of something greater than ourselves, not for the benefit of the collective, but for the exaltation of the individual. Food for thought from eco-spiritualist Thomas Berry. Our fate and the fate of the planet are identical. We must shift from the human-centered view of our existence to a realization that the earth is a communion of subjects, a oneness of which we are all a part of. It is not a collection of objects for our use. We must enter a new sacred story that's emerging to meet the barrenness of our times. The idea of bending our knee to the unknowable, unfathomable mystery of creation vanishes, replaced by us by an endless herd of golden calves. Desire trumps humility. We even worship the narcissist, believing that we will one day be them and no longer have to fear scarcity, that we can rocket away from this crumbling earth and land safe and immortal on some nearby rock. We sleepwalk, muttering about freedom, rushing to claim our victimhood, blind to our privilege and the gift that life can be. Alan Morinus writes in a book called Everyday Holiness, which in my tradition there's something called Musar. Musar is the development and articulation of your character traits or your soul traits. I'll give examples. You would work on something like gratitude. You would work on patience, silence. Usually when I work with people 2 weeks at a time, I just go, okay, now journal a little bit about how you notice your patience or your lack of patience. And then we talk about that and how does it fit? And not, oh, I'm going to be patient for 2 weeks. How does it really work in my life? I like doing that work. There's no limit to what we don't have, and if that's where we focus, then our lives are inevitably filled with the endless sense of dissatisfaction. That's from Marinus. So every year I go on a men's retreat with a wonderful group of men, Americans. There are good Americans. And we explore this. One year at our retreat, we explored the trait of gratitude. So at one point, there's about 100 men, but we break out into these smaller groups. And I asked the men I was gathered with to reflect on the place that gratitude occupies or is absent in their lives. And the consensus was that we all struggled with the elusive goal of enough. There's that old story of Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller. They go to a millionaire. At the time, there were only millionaires. There weren't billionaires yet. So they go to a millionaire's party in New York. And there's, it's Bacchanal, it's Caligula. It's, ice sculptures and half-naked waiters and waitresses walking around. And Heller turns to Vonnegut. No, Vonnegut turns to Heller and says, this is crazy. I mean, this guy's got everything. And Heller says, no, he doesn't have everything. He goes, well, what could he possibly still want with everything that he has? What do you have that he doesn't have? And Heller says, I have enough. We don't say that much. In a society built on consumption, we can't afford to feel sated. If we do, then we won't be needing the next car, the next house, the next life partner. We must be close enough to the finish line that perhaps one more purchase, one more title, one more victory will arrive. But arrival itself would spell disaster for a system that can only thrive on perpetual growth. Blind to the fact that we've already blown past the natural limits this earth can provide, we push on. There's a wonderful book called Donut Economics. It's a little turgid, but it talks about how we literally have blown past the limits of growth. And so when you're listening to Peter Armstrong on CBC and he's saying, it's been a good quarter, 2.5% growth. And I'm thinking, it's been a bad quarter. 2.5% growth. When are we going to stop since it's already past the limit? But that's how we think. So how did we get here? In fact, the death of the collective in Western culture has been a 500-year journey. It's not a coincidence that the attack on paganism, the birth of the Protestant Reformation, the amassing of wealth in Western Europe, the enclosure movement of public becoming private lands that happened in England, they all happened at roughly the same time. And we can thank Enlightenment heroes like René, I think, therefore I am, Descartes, for a profound shift in how we see the world around us. Descartes argued that the soul is only to be found in the possession of humans. Even then, it turns out he meant only certain humans, the pink-skinned kind, the male kind. He lectured on the mechanical relationship that we have with all that surround us, inanimate matter and unfeeling life forms. And to prove his point, he would dissect animals while they were still alive, claiming that they were not suffering because they weren't sentient. They were just reacting because of muscle and nerve stimulation. How could they possibly fear death if they had no self-awareness, no knowledge of the fact that they were going to die? To drive his point home, he took the knife to his wife's dog, who, conscious of its existence or not, died on the table. If only humans of a type can be considered precious and filled with spirit and blessed with a spark of the divine, then everything else is only measured by its value in keeping our ecosystem alive. So I want to pause for a second. Ecosystem to me is this pyramid. We're at the top, and we need to feed everything to that top. Ecosystem is a circle. We're in it and interconnected with everything. In the ecosystem, a human conquers nature, each other, and in the minds of disciples of Atlas Shrugged author Ayn Rand, we conquer ourselves. We hunt out weakness. We raise the sword of superiority to strike a blow for dominion over all. It manifests in authoritarianism and the toxic masculinity of the strong man. Gee, I wonder where we can find that today. And it's not just that guy. It's the comfort of the Father who protects us from all and provides for us, but only us. Linguist and political communications guru George Lakoff describes it this way: the conservative embodies the strict father ethos. That's where we get the rhetoric of tough on crime, self-made man, and I do mean man, and keep a tight grip on the purse strings. After all, as I heard one politician declare as their conservative government in Ontario took power, the best form of welfare is a job, or two, or three if they pay you poverty wages. If you're poor, it's your fault. Lakoff describes the liberal wing of our capitalist system as the nurturing parent paradigm. If things are going wrong, there's got to be a reason. Our job is to lift each other up, not by the bootstraps. A liberal would ask, when did the war on poverty become the war on the poor? The world we live in is best defined as petroculture. Simon Orpana lays that out in some hard truths in his graphic novel, Gasoline Dreams, Waking Up from the Petroculture. He says, in the Western world, and North America in particular, we've become energy vampires, sucking up more than our fair share of energy resources in pursuit of lifestyles that rarely deliver on the promises of prosperity and happiness that are sold to us. Orpana argues that even though petroculture is only 70 or at the most 80 years old, what it's brought us is so profoundly reshaped the individual and the society that we can't imagine the world in any other form. We devolve into nostalgia when we're confronted by the effects of our oily addictions. We live better in a middle-class life than the best king in medieval Europe. That's amazing to me. How do you give that up? Why would I give that up? What do I care if it has other effects? For now, it works. We turn to the authoritarian who reassures us that our next hit of cheap energy will have no consequences and is ours for the taking. We're weaned on false notions of scarcity. We need a strong arm to lift us above the fray. Take our perceptions around food, for example. In North America today, literally 1/3 of all food produced is wasted. 1/3 of all food. 1 trillion galaxies, 1/3 of all food. Both are just as hard for me to believe. Shopping carts get bigger and bigger. If you go to Costco, you end up with a 4-liter wheel of a Jamocha almond fudge and a TV set. And you didn't mean to buy either of them. We filled them, and 5 days later, those carts that have been filled, we opened the crisper in our oversized refrigerator, and I personally am confronted by the gooey mess of a dead cucumber. We can go anywhere. Orpana talks about collapsing distances. I mean, we came to Calgary yesterday and then drove up over to here for the night. In the morning, we were in Hamilton, then we were in Toronto, then we were in Calgary, then we were in Lethbridge. It's like it was nothing. People sit on planes at 35,000 feet at 500 miles an hour, and they complain. Are those pretzels fresh? That's it? It's a miracle. You're in the air at 35,000 feet. Once you have it, you take it for granted. He talks about collapsing distances while our destinations become more and more homogenized. Leave one place, go to another, and you get a world of billboards and shopping malls, fast food, and outlet stores. Petroculture has made our world smaller, more independent, but as the World Health Organization just announced, it's created a pandemic of loneliness. Now we peer through the lens of the existential. Let's circle back to dominion, the ego system. It has more than its share of adherents in the world of religion. Man has dominion over nature. Now that phrase allows us to measure relationships by their utility. The utility they have in pursuit of our individual wants, needs, and desires. In other words, what use are you to me? You know that party you're at and somebody says hello to you and they say, what do you do? In Toronto, people say, what do you do? They don't say, how are you or who are you? What do you do? And then you tell them, and they realize you're no use to them. So they start looking over your shoulder while you're talking, looking for the next person, and you're like, oh, I guess I'm of no use to you. Martin Buber writes about the idea of relationships built on I and thou, and the profane utility of I and it. So, you know, in yoga class, they say namaste at the end. And I think most of the people in there think it feels nice, but don't really know what it means. It actually means I salute the divine within you. So, imagine if you said that to somebody walking down the street in Lethbridge. You're walking, they're walking, I salute the divine within you. And they go, hey man, what do you want from me? Are you nuts? We just say, hey, how's it going? We don't even mean that. We don't want to know how it's going. We just say, hey, how's it going? But what a thing to say, I salute the divine within you. That's just a hello. Hands near your heart, and that's what you say. We've reduced it to a yoga class, and then you go home and put a Buddha in your lawn, you're done. You're in good shape. The choice of utility over the sacred nature of relationships finds its way into the political discourse as we obsess about catch-all labels like the taxpayer. In my work, I do some political communications and strategic planning for how to communicate messages for political parties, and I did it for a college for 4.5 years as well. I'd always advise people to take, I had a cabinet minister I worked with, and I said to him, I don't want you to say taxpayer in this speech. What are you talking about? I mean, it's the people's money. They want to know how it's being spent. I said, I don't want you to say it because what you're really talking about is an I-it relationship, the price of everything and the value of nothing. I mean, if you're a taxpayer, you're a customer. And yet you don't want to pay taxes, but you want the service. Why was nobody at the other end of the phone? Because you don't want to pay for somebody to be at the other end of the phone. So I say, yeah, you're a taxpayer, I get it. You want service. But you also have duties, and you have responsibilities. And we've given those up in a lot of cases. The best way to figure this out is go door knocking for a political candidate. It's quite an education. I always avoid door knocking for the politicians I've worked for. And by the way, I don't know how many times I've heard people tell me politicians are crooks and bums. I've worked with politicians. There's a lot of them who really want to do something good. It's horrible for your family life. You know, why didn't you come to the Lithuanian square dance? Well, you know, because it's the 7th night I would have been out, and my kids don't know who I am anymore. I don't care. Why didn't you come to the Lithuanian square dance? So it's a pretty thankless job, and it really has a deep and profound effect on people who do it, burns them out bad. The Samara Institute in Toronto did a study of MPs after their time was up. Not happy campers. The other thing is they show up thinking they're going to have a voice and be activists, and they end up being meat puppets who jump up and down when the leader of the party says something. So it can be pretty, it's theater in most cases, and it's not that convincing anymore. I mean, you knock on doors, door number 1 has 2 school-aged children. She wants a better school, more crossing guards, and a return to extracurricular activities. Go to the next door, door number 2, well, they don't give a hoot about better schools because their children flew the coop decades ago. They want lower property taxes and a war on crime. Then they hear about things, by the way, the war on crime, 500% overrepresented. If you read the newspaper, remember those? If you read the newspaper from any city, you wouldn't go. Stabbing it to who knows where, you know? Toronto has 3 million people, and CBC Radio leads, we used to look down on it. 25 years ago at CBC, it was like, oh, so Keith Morrison was going to Los Angeles to be an anchor. And we were all sneering, oh, it bleeds, it leads. That's what they're all about. And now, turn on CBC Radio, and the first thing you'll hear about is crime. You know, public radio has turned into a police scanner. Sorry, that one always bugs me. One of the other things I think about, though, when I think about how we want for ourselves is 40 houses, 40 lawnmowers. We really need 40 lawnmowers? We had 50 centimeters, which I could never get my head around, of snow in Hamilton, where we live now. And, you know, we're out there chunking away, trying to get a parking spot carved out, you know. And one guy had a snowblower, but God love him. He went to house and and just cleared as much as he could. And I said to him, what do you like, scotch, red wine, white wine? And he said, I love doing this. And I thought, we need more people like this guy. 40 lawnmowers for 40 houses. We've actually been convinced. We've become atomized, and we're desperate to have our material needs met, but just our needs. Here's another thing from Alan Marinas. Humility. Now, usually when we say humility, we're talking about, oh, don't mind me, just go out, go ahead, go ahead. That's not humility. Humility is occupying a rightful space, neither too much nor too little. Focus neither on your own virtues nor the faults of others. Tough job. Humility has a spectrum. At one end is loving kindness, and at the other end is strength. You got to find a way to be in the middle. You can't just be loving and kind to everybody, and you can't just tell everybody, follow me. You got to find the middle. When is it appropriate to lead? You know, teaching is a sage on the stage endeavor. When does the sage have to know it's appropriate to listen and to learn from the student? Mentoring is not just, you know, old people like me telling people what to think. It's about a relationship, and we don't have those relationships quite often. So the kindness that allows us to be compassionate towards others, and through that kindness, we're able to truly hear them and put ourselves not in a place of power, but instead enlarge the space so that together you can move forward with those people. The strength comes from knowing when your gifts are needed to lead, and when they're better used in following and supporting others. Loving kindness without strength is what we used to call in parenting manuals the jellyfish parent. My wife and I went to see the Van Gogh immersive experience. We drove down to Toronto, we're there. It was cool, like, you know, the paintings came to life, it was fantastic, I loved it. But there's this kid, about this big, running up and down, all through, screaming her brains out. And I'm thinking to myself, where's her mother? And her mother's standing near the doorway talking with a friend. And I'm sure she thought that the loving kindness was enough. Just let my child be who she is. But me being a grumpy old guy, I walked up to somebody, excuse me, can we do, is there something we can do about the screaming? Because we, you know, drove here for an hour and we'd love to see the show. And he goes, yeah, we're getting a lot of complaints about that. So he walks up to the woman, and I don't know, he said it well, I guess, because she didn't recoil. And she picks up the kid, and the kid stops crying. And I thought, that's jellyfish. That's not loving kindness without strength. You need boundaries. There were no boundaries. So that was part of the problem. So if we approach nature and the environment without this openness to awe and wonder, if we no longer speak the language of fraternity and beauty in our relationships with the world, our attitude will be that of masters, consumers, and ruthless exploiters, unable to set limits on their immediate needs. By contrast, if we feel intimately united with all that exists, then sobriety and care will well up spontaneously. Who do you think said this? Sounds like a socialist to me. Could have been, I'm not sure. It was Pope Francis. So even in the religious world, there is an awakening for some people at some time. Dominion implies I-it relationships. Even stewardship, which is the gentler iteration of that idea, keeps us outside of the very thing that we are a part of. God is out there, not in here. Watch a baseball player drive a ball over the left field fence. As they step on home plate, a lot of them touch their heart, point to the sky, and they thank God. Up there, out there. This divine is an object. Heaven is a faraway destination. Yes, there's an element of awe and marveling at what we believe is out there, but imagine if we bring a different eye to the experience. One that sees no separation, but instead a profound sense that what we are seeing, imagining, wondering over is as much of inside of us as outside of us. First time I drove to Banff, it was the Banff Television Festival. We went like every year ad nauseum for a while. It was June and it was way colder than we thought it was going to be. But I'm driving towards the mountains and I think, hey, we're almost there. And then 45 minutes later, I'm like, hey, we're almost there. But we get there, and I'd never been in the Rocky Mountains. And I thought I'd be standing at the top of a mountain looking for miles through the horizon. I couldn't see a bloody thing. There were mountains in front of me everywhere. It was like, what? Bummer. But then I also looked at those mountains and thought, I don't like this. I like oceans where there's life and movement. This is like dead granite. But then I remembered the Donovan songs. Any of you old enough for Donovan? First there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is, which turns out to be a Japanese Zen koan. First there's a mountain, immovable, kind of dead. You're never going to get there. But then you get there, and there's elk walking around, and water rushing by with fish in it, and the whole place is alive. And the granite itself is not what it was 500,000 years ago. It is changing at its rate. We are changing at ours. So first there's a mountain, then there's no mountain, there's all this life, and then there's a mountain again. But now you see it differently. And that's the sacredness that I like to think about more, is that these things are right in front of us and we think they're dead. Who's dead? Thich Nhat Hanh, a Buddhist monk, just passed away actually, had a retreat called Plum Village in Paris, near Paris in France. And he talks about interbeing. We're not human beings, we're interbeings. And that everything we do affects everything else. There's a woman named Sylvia Burstein. She wrote a book called Funny You Don't Look Buddhist. And she was a woman who became a Buddhist nun and then became a rabbi. She was a Jewish woman who became, the largest cohort of Buddhists in North America are Jewish. It's called being a Jubu. So she talked about that idea as well of interbeing with people. And karma, you know, the way we use karma is, hey man, what comes around goes around. We talk about it as a retribution tool. And she talked about it as everything that has happened in the universe, everything that has happened, had to happen for us to be sitting here right now. And if it had happened any different way, we wouldn't be here. And everything we do from this moment on will affect everything that goes on in the universe afterwards. And I love that. I totally got that. So instead of hoping for miracles from above, we could show gratitude for the miracle that is us. Satish Kumar is an Indian spiritual and environmental commentator, and he writes about dominion. This arrogant worldview has led us to the demise of reciprocal, mutual, respectful, reverential, spiritual relationships between humans and the rest of nature. Nature is out there, the forest, the rivers, the birds, and other wildlife. And we humans are in here, enclosed in our homes, our palaces, our castles, our apartments, our offices, our cars, our trains, and our airplanes. I want to take what he says for a second and inhabit it. Have you noticed, like I have, that once ensconced behind the wheel of your car, you're no longer the same? The indignities pop up like weeds. The driver that didn't get in, the traffic jam that slows the journey, the cyclist taking up too much bloody road. Wrapped in our tubes of metal, plastic, rubber, and glass, we hurtle through the environment feeling close to nothing. We spend so much of our lives neutralizing the living world around us that without effort we can ignore the damage we're inflicting on our one and only home. The images of ice floes the size of a Midwest American state crumbling before our internet-driven eyes elicits nothing more than a helpless shrug. We buy hard goods like printers, fridges, and cars that are not made to last. Again, we shrug. We've become commodities ourselves. Search for a mattress online. You're going to be hounded to the grave by data harvesters that own everything about you, and they know everything about you, and spend their days selling you to the highest bidder. They should be paying us to have a phone. We're paying them, and they should be paying us, because that phone allows people to just mine the hell out of us. And here we are in Canada with the highest rates of anywhere in the world, and we all have one. Sam Keen also wrote how we reconcile the relationship to agnosticism and a yearning for everyday spirituality. The largest, I guess you could call it, religious group in North America is spiritual but not religious. That's the biggest cohort now. He said, I've come to be suspicious of any religion or form of therapy that focuses exclusively on cultivating the interior life or saving the soul, and does not include a celebration of the senses, an ecological vision, and a concern for social justice. We can aspire to care for and transform the world only if we trust that the Spirit is incarnate in flesh and dirt. The world is our home. We are in the right place. We do not need to escape to heaven or some NASA space colony. John Philip Newell, in his book Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul, shows how Christianity itself found ways to take earth-based spirituality and wring it dry of sensuality and soulful connection. How many people would say that the church experience is sensual? You're actually never supposed to say that sort of thing. That's a bad thing. But imagine those ecstatic expressions of faith. Dervishes for the Sufis, Hasidic Jews. I went to a service where they were talking in tongues and people were falling on the floor. But you know what? They were trying to find another way to get to God because the rational way wasn't going to work for them. Newell writes, "What happened to the spirituality that saw the universe as sacred and cherished in every newborn child, that wove together heaven and earth, flesh and angels, prayers and nature?" Formal opposition began in the 16th century with the Scottish Reformation, which saw Celtic prayers as vile, pagan practices. The Calvinists denounced Celtic teachings as lying Gaelic stories. Prudish legalism now began to replace life-affirming spirituality of the islands. Even the rooster was locked away on the Sabbath, lest it think of doing anything natural with the hens. Got to watch those roosters. So what to do? Perhaps it's time for a new conspiracy, a conspiracy of hope. Time to start a whisper campaign that reimagines our relationship to ourselves, each other, and the little blue dot floating in this unimaginable cosmos that we call home. To do that, we need an operating manual. Each person, each culture has to find a way to build a connective tissue that brings us into harmony, a way to be together. Community is hard, I know that. Be it the church, the workplace, or the family, there are plenty of irritants that make it easier to withdraw back into the latest installment of Love is Blind. And by the way, the new season's not that good. I digress. We have, over millennia, created a system of community building that, given our present state of isolation, we'd be well advised to resuscitate. So in our home, we've chosen the Sabbath as our best delivery system for creating community one meal at a time. I don't think it's a coincidence that the people who wrote the Old Testament, yes, God did not write the Old Testament, included keeping the Sabbath and making it holy as right there in the top 10. It all started for my wife and I. I'd done this show called Five Seekers. We produced a show called Five Seekers. And what we did was we looked for people who had given up on organized religion but were still spiritually seeking. By the way, side note, 2/3 of the people who applied to be on the show were Roman Catholics. I found that interesting. No Muslims applied, but lots of Catholics. So we went to Sedona, Arizona for a week and gave them all these experiences, sound bathing and didgeridoos, and then we went to Hollyhock, which is on Cortes Island in British Columbia. And we did past life regression. We did all kinds of things. We gave them breath work. Most of them were looking for the aha moment, right? Just hit me with it, and I'll change forever. But I don't think it works that way. The divine lightning bolt, they thought, would give them a new life. I kept looking at them and thinking what they have is, for lack of a better word, they have a God hole. There's something missing in the middle there. And God love them, they really want to have that experience. They want to be able to feel like there's something more to this life. It's like when I was a kid and Peggy Lee came out with Is That All There Is? And I thought, why'd you bring that up? Let's keep dancing, break out the booze, and have a ball if that's all there is. I did used to think when I was a kid, what kind of a cruel joke is this? Like, who would put us here and then go, by the way, you're going to die? That's not nice. But I was the youngest in my family, and I thought, well, at least I'll die last. Twisted logic at the best. So we're in Hollyhock, and we see a flyer on the billboard there, this woman inviting everyone to a Sabbath dinner at her home. She wasn't on our agenda, but one of the producers noticed it and said, hey, do you think we should give her a call? I was like, yeah, sure, give her a call. And she said, okay, yeah, you can come to my house with your camera crew to do this. So we got there. I assumed she was Jewish, absolutely. When we got there, first thing we find out is she's not Jewish. Second thing is she set up these, what looked like kind of all religion stations of the cross. She had a Buddha, she had Ganesh, she had a crescent, she had a Star of David, she had everything. She had the Jesus, on the cross. So we sat down for dinner and I asked her, why she did all this stuff. And she said, well, I went to somebody's Sabbath dinner once and I thought, this is great, I want to do it. And she'd been doing it for years ever since. So I got home from the shoot and I said to my wife, this woman, she did this Sabbath. Now I grew up with it, but I hadn't done it in a long time. So we had a newborn baby. We knew we weren't going anywhere on a Friday night. So we thought, why not start inviting people to the house? We called it the New Sabbath Project. We'd send out emails to our friends. If I met somebody at the time, I was working for the jazz station in Toronto, Jazz FM. And if there was a guest who was there, and I thought, oh, they're kind of interesting, I'd just invite them to the house. We didn't know who they were. It didn't matter what they were. Religious, not religious, we didn't care. We developed a ritual of our own, and we hoped it would be inclusive and meaningful. So first thing we do is we gather people around appetizers and some wine. And it always amazes me that people thrown together find a way to find each other and start talking to each other. And it can get really great. And then we ask them to come and sit down at the table. We also do this potluck. And we do it potluck for two reasons. One, 2 weeks ago we had 14 people at the house. If I did that every week, I'll go broke. But that's not the real reason. The real reason is because if you're emotionally invested in the dinner, the stakes go up. Like you watch somebody looking at their dish to see if people are eating it. The stakes go up. So what we do is we do a brief explanation of Sabbath is 1 day of being after 6 days of doing. And then we light 2 candles to demarcate the difference between the doing time of life and the being kind of life. And anybody who's Jewish in the room can sing the blessing for that to start the Sabbath. And then we bless the wine for the nourishment that it gives us. And then the last thing we do is we uncover a challah, which is an egg loaf bread, braided bread. My wife makes the best challah on the planet. So everybody loves it. But what I do, I'm Moroccan, and our tradition is you rip the bread, you dip it in salt for the tears of slavery. Now, it's not just the tears of slavery of Egypt and Yul Brynner and Charlton Heston. It's the slavery that we are in now. The slavery to our phone. How many times do you just go, oh my God, if it's, just put the bloody thing down for a minute. It wasn't even here 15 years ago. First phone, by the way, remember those? The size of a walkie-talkie? I had one of those. I was on a show, and the first Gulf War was on, and they had to have us on call at all times to come in to do interviews about it. You'd put one of these in your suit pocket, and your suit would just go, it weighed a ton. So what we do is I dip it in the salt, but I throw it, literally throw it to the people around the table. But you do it in the order of age. Now, in a family, who cares? Everybody knows each other's age. Nobody's embarrassed about their age. But we're terrified of telling people how old we are. It's a stigma to say how old you are. It's like, so I say, well, okay, I'm 69. Who else? How old are you? And you look at people and they're terrified when they're looking at you. 57? And then their husband says, 55? I'm younger than her. It's just like, it's okay. But it breaks down another wall. It's another vulnerability. It allows us to be together without nonsense. And then we go around the table and we do gratitudes. It can be anything. It can be a blessing on someone. It can be, look, my mother's sick. I'm worried about her, so she's in my thoughts. Somebody sometimes turns to their partner and goes, I barely think I've seen you this week, but I just want to tell you I care, and I'm really sorry I've been so absent and running around. So all these declarations are real. and they come from the heart. I do the first one just to say, this is sort of how it goes. But I love what comes out of people as we go around. Somebody can bless a life achievement, the arrival of the first tulips, the first frost, more wind. But one thing I do know is that these thoughts transform the gathering. From there, everything gets juicy. After the blessings, we basically raise a glass to a better life with the fruit of the vine and the nourishment that it brings, and then we do the hulla. The hulla thing, so one day I was throwing the hulla around, and there was a little kid at the table. This was years ago. And he's looking at everybody, and I'm doing this, and it's unimaginable to him, but it looks like an adult food fight. And he's like, wow. So I throw him a piece of bread. He catches it, he looks at it, and he throws it right back at me. I love that kid. So from there we serve the meal, and I'd say almost every single time, people leave feeling a glow. For one night, they've overcome the separateness. For me, Sabbath is an act of subversion. It's like stop time. Instead of now it's Saturday and I can run my errands, it's just stop. Put it all down. Imagine if we all did this together. Imagine if we all put down our phones at the same day for 24 hours. If we didn't drive around and do errands. If we just were with people around us. That's subversion. That's a subversion of a system that wants nothing to do with that. Just keep you going, keep you going. We have the social software and whatever traditions and new innovations that surround me. It's not effortless, by the way. In fact, it can be really bloody hard to bring people together. But I think it's harder to live life alone, to raise children alone, and increasingly now to work alone. I work alone. My wife works alone. She's on the third floor. I'm in the garage, and with 2 heaters on. But they're all on screens. And then I walk the dog in the same neighborhood over and over again. I feel like I'm in a bad movie at that point, but I'm alone, and it drives me nuts. I was once interviewed for a job. At the time I was young, 30. I'd been hosting a radio show called Prime Time on CBC in Toronto. One day I saw in the paper that they were looking for a co-host for the first noontime national current affairs show in Canada. I asked for an interview. Surprisingly, I got one. And the executive producer, who also produced the Twin program, which was the Journal, with Barbara Frum, he was a brilliant journalistic mind, Mark Starowich. We sat in his office, and he was smoking his pipe. In those days, you could smoke anywhere in an office, really. First, he mentioned that he'd noticed on my resume that I was a stand-up comic. And he looked at me, and he said, well, that wasn't serious, was it? And I said, well, yeah. It's kind of how I paid the rent. Yeah, I'd say it was serious. So he pressed me further. Why do you want to host this show? And without thinking, I immediately replied, to conquer the feeling of separateness. I wasn't sure where that came from at the time. But over my life, I've realized that that has always been my North Star. That life is so short. But I do believe it's sacred. That heaven is not somewhere else, it's all around us. By retaining our sense of awe, by searching like some sort of metal-detecting beachcomber, we can find the treasures beneath our feet. The show, by the way, was called Midday, and I did get the job. Here's something from Matthew Fox. He was kicked out of the church. Anybody know Matthew Fox? So he was asked to leave, excommunicated, because he said that the faith had devolved into Jesus-olatry. And he created a whole new idea called creation spirituality, to really be in awe of the universe and all that it brings. He said we need a whole new civilization, one that includes the irrational, because human nature is at the bottom irrational. While Meister Eckhart speaks of finding the ground of our soul, and Otto Rank says that truth is at the bottom of our beings, because society is rational, or at least pretends to be, we suffer from its rational ideology, which in fact is born of inhibited negation of life. Instead, why not a community of celebrating life? The celebration of life, this optimism, begins with awe and wonder, with marveling at the creation itself, the via positiva, the rediscovery of the awe and wonder, the delight and joy of existence. So what I experienced today in Lethbridge was wind, a great amount of wind. The Hebrew word for wind is ruach. It also means spirit, and it means breath. There's an image in the Old Testament of God breathing life into the nostrils of the beings of Adam and Eve, that the breath of life is embedded in the trillions of stars and planets around us. I saw a thing on the ticker tape on the news in the hotel room today that they've discovered, God knows how, they discovered that a planet or a galaxy that is close to the origin of the universe by their calculation, 13.2 billion years old, contains oxygen and a bit of water. So maybe Star Trek wasn't wrong. There's part of a prayer in the Jewish tradition that says, we breathe life into the trees, and the trees breathe life into us. I've been involved in environmental politics for a long time. It's pretty windy territory. We can't even accept a low-level solution like carbon pricing. It's an outrage. Bloody hell, it's the littlest thing you could do. Change is hard. Climate change is harder, much harder. Ask people who live in Jasper. I remember watching the Alberta provincial election campaign in '23. The fires were burning. The sky was literally orange. And neither political party dared put environmental destruction front and center of their campaign. Neither of them. Isn't happening. We need a conspiracy of hope, not one to condemn, but to inspire. And not just young people. I really reject the idea that they're supposed to carry the banner of a greener future. We all have to join together. Elders for legacy, those raising a family, and frankly, those that claim to lead us as clergy. We have in front of us an opportunity for reunioning between individuals, communities, and the earth, fueled by that conspiracy of hope. Every movement needs a fuel. I can only offer that the one we could be drilling for is compassion. Compassion is at the heart of innovation. To be able to put yourself in the shoes of someone who you were in service to was the reason that BlackBerry died and the iPhone won, because the people who designed the iPhone got that we wanted a little magic. And the people who gave you a BlackBerry thought you needed a little more work. But what would happen if we put the marvelous machine down for a whole day? If we stopped scrolling, stopped doing, and just be? What would happen if we did it together? I started with something from environmental champion and scientist Garth Speth. I will leave you with this from Mr. Speth. Decades of discourse led by lawyers, scientists, economists, and we're stuck. They can't do what must be done, reach the human heart. The deep problems are avarice, arrogance, and apathy. Our dominant values gone astray. We need not more analysis, but a spiritual awakening and a new consciousness. To bring on the preachers, so bring on the preachers and prophets, the poets and the philosophers, the psychologists and the psychiatrists. Bring on the writers, musicians, actors, artists. Bring on the dreamers. Call them to strike the chords of our shared humanity, of our close kin to wild things. Call them to help find a new world. Thank you. Thank you.